There's fantasy, and there's reality. And for some, there's no dividing line between them. I've been a fan of role-playing games since high school, which was further back than I'd like to think about. Fantasy was pretty much the standard theme of all the games I'd played, and still do play. People like us love to make up stories about our characters, the places they grew up, the towns they live in, to the point where they feel pretty real to us. But we can all agree on one thing. None of it is real. We work our largely mundane jobs and get through the monthly bills like everyone else. We escape every other weekend or so for a night of snacks, friends, geek talk, and telling stories. We play around a kitchen or coffee table, show off our newest additions to our dice collections, and generally break things up before midnight, as we all have to get up in decent time for the next day. My ex and I started a local gaming convention that ran in the local library once a year. It was an excuse to get together for a weekend, try out different games, and meet new players. Some out-of-town vendors would rent a corner and sell products and books we, in those pre-internet days, couldn't easily get hold of. We usually invited a guest of honor too, someone who worked in the industry, who would run some events and generally drum up interest. I met Harold at the second convention we held. He came up to me, loaded down with his gaming paraphernalia, and bluntly asked if he could be the guest of honor next year. He was writing a role-playing game, he said. Now, the writing a game part by itself wasn't that odd. Every gamer who's ever rolled the dice has tried to write their own game at least once. And nerds who have an inflated sense of self-importance aren't that rare either. I said that if the game got published by a big company, and it proved popular, we'd talk then. He seemed satisfied with this and moved on. Harold became something of a fixture in the local gaming community. He was a bit socially awkward, but most of us were, had thick glasses, and was a little on the short side. He was far from the worst offender, however. He was at least presentable, washed regularly, and if he did tend to dominate the conversation when he got you cornered, he at least didn't attempt to hit on you. He was, by all accounts, a decent game master. That is, he was good at remembering the rules and setting up a balanced scenario with characters that could battle or think their way out of it. Several of my friends also gamed with him outside of the convention. Harold wasn't my favorite person to deal with, but he wasn't the most dreaded either. He was a nerd, but that I could handle. He was one of those delicate members of the species that we all considered harmless. I was never threatened or afraid of him. There was nothing to be afraid of, other than getting stuck listening to his long-winded gamer stories. Harold worked at a toxic waste handling plant. At the time, this meant basically warehousing dangerous chemicals. Factories would pay the company to take the barrels and crates of the stuff off their hands, and the company would either find creative ways to store it, or break it down into something less terrifying. Harold worked mainly nights, and largely did watchman duties, although sometimes he told stories of having to help move various containers into holding spaces. He'd laugh when he'd tell us how he'd found out later what they'd contained, although he never encountered a bad spill, and was never in any real danger. Some of his friends had seen his pay stubs and noticed that Harold didn't make a vast amount of money. Harold also paid a portion of his wages to his mother, a widow, who I met exactly once. She was a frail thing and walked with a cane, always dressed in black, and looked like she'd been born 85 years old. Like Harold, she'd corner you and pull you into a conversation, telling you all about her dead husband, how she missed him, and how much Harold was like him. For the next 5 years, we saw Harold at the local game and hobby store, and at the convention. His life wasn't really going anywhere. Still working at the waste treatment plant, still helping out his mother, still gaming. He flirted at least once with the idea of a girlfriend, but it didn't take. He still met up with his gaming buddies once a week, always at their house. Then one day I was at work. I worked Friday nights at a local comic shop, if you can believe it. Yes, I am that much of a geek. When one of Harold's friends ran in with the news. Harold was in jail. His mother had been calling around to his gaming buds for help, not knowing where else to turn, and not for the reasons you'd suspect. It turns out she was the one who had him up on charges. Harold, it turns out, had beaten her up so severely she'd ended up in hospital. We found out that Harold had never worked at any plant, toxic waste related or no. He'd forged the pay stubs, or possibly altered stolen ones, and had planted them where his friends would find them. He'd even had work clothes, coveralls, and the like, that he showed up in from time to time when he was on his way to work, that he didn't wear otherwise. Where the hell he went at night is anyone's guess. We lived in a pretty small town, and I never remember seeing him when he was working. He'd been living off his mother for years. She'd owned several rental properties, and the income had somehow fallen into Harold's control. Legally, he didn't own anything. He'd bullied his mother into handing over control of her money. He'd also hit her on many previous occasions. She was afraid of him, and had no idea what to do. I know guys tend to protect each other in times like this. I've watched my male friends defend just about anything their other male friends do, sometimes to the point of absurdity. Not in this case. I guess beating up your helpless mom is where they drew the line. When confronted by his buds, Harold strangely said that he needed his stuff at his mom's house moved to a storage locker he'd arranged, probably through his lawyer, but told them to keep any gaming stuff they wanted to. The room was packed with games Harold had never been known to buy. Some of it was still unopened. He'd spent more on gaming materials than we knew of. It's possible, as he had a car, that when he was working, he was actually driving out of town to buy more product he'd shove under his bed or in his closet and never touch. In some cases, there were duplicates of books, games. I'm not sure if he did this intentionally, or if he'd just forgotten what he owned and bought it again. Harold had role-played a mundane life. None of it was true, but all of it had been believable. Why he picked such a boring fantasy life to fake, we'll never know. Maybe he was smart enough to know we wouldn't buy anything grander. Maybe he thought this particular job made him sound macho somehow. I wonder sometimes if Harold's mother also made up a fantasy life. Harold never spoke about his father or his childhood, certainly never to me. Maybe his mom faked widowhood, wearing black, to mourn a man who'd left her when she fell pregnant. It wouldn't be unheard of for a gal of her generation. He did a brief stint in jail and then moved out of town. Where he is now, I have no idea. I'm sure wherever he is, he's still living a fantasy life. Harold the role player. Let's not meet. My sister never had great taste in men, and during the autumn of 2012, she started dating a man named Marco. He was her age, 26, and worked as a chef. My sister and I are very much alike, but also each other's opposites. Identical twins, but with two very different sets of personalities. She is trusting and fun-loving, social and bubbly. I'm a total introvert, in love with my books. We are very close, though. Always been, as I assume most twins are. It was when she first brought Marco to a family dinner at my parents' place that I noticed some less than charming cracks in his otherwise well-kept mask. It was subtle at first, but it was there, the signs of a controlling and jealous mind. an ever so brief hint of contempt that dances across his face every time she paid attention to someone else. Or when it became evident that she was much more intelligent and well-read than he. He was very good-looking, though, I'll give him that. And I guess that's the veil that kept my sister from seeing the truth. A wolf in sheep's clothing. He was fit, tall, with broad shoulders and green eyes. A charming smile, and a confident posture. Soon she stopped calling me. She called me on a daily basis before. Then the family dinners thinned out to almost nothing. She started wearing clothes she wouldn't normally pick out herself. I tried talking to her, but at first she wouldn't listen. Because when he wasn't a controlling asshole, he was the love of her life. Yeah, I told her. Psychos are weird like that. Anyway, one afternoon she phoned me up. I was standing in line at the grocery store, but what she told me made me drop everything and rush out to the car. She called me from a cafe, and what she told me was chilling. They had had a fight, a verbal fight, that had escalated until he left their home and slammed the door. Later he had returned with a new car. He had sold the old two-door thing and bought a larger one, an old Volvo V70. He had stared at her and said, "This car's got a trunk so large that I can easily fit a body in there. Just so you know." At that point she had gone into the bathroom, started to draw a bath, and climbed out the window. Where I live, this kind of threat isn't taken seriously by the police. If you haven't been hit, and got the marks to prove it, you got nothing. So we decided that she would leave town, and take that job offer she had been interested in, but turned down because he didn't want her to drive over an hour to work each day. She would go stay with her friend Joe, who lived just under an hour from the new workplace, but 2 hours from her current city. Joe was an old childhood friend, and had never been introduced to Marco. It felt safe. I had phone contact with her every day to make sure things were okay. She seemed happy again, and I felt the danger was over. Until that day when I was out running. I had finished my run and returned to the parking lot. I usually hide the car key on top of one of the tires, and as I reached down to grab it, he put his arm around my throat, tight enough to cause breathing difficulties. "One twin is as good as the other," he whispered and started dragging me away from the car. "Your sister caused this. It's her fucking fault. She will never see you again. That's the punishment." He mumbled in my ear as he moved me towards his car. Not the Volvo, but still a car of the right size. I was panicking, and despite my struggling and kicking and desperate squirming, he had no problem keeping his hold on me, and it was terrifying to realize how much stronger he was than I. I'm a fit woman. I run and fence. I have competed in CrossFit, and I did all I could to fend him off, but it didn't help. That's when I used my one free arm to stab the car key in his inner thigh. I aimed for something more painful, but his hold on me made it impossible to move enough. It stunned him enough to loosen his grip a bit, and I used the short window to crush the tiny bones in his foot with my terrain running shoes. He still managed to knock me down, but was then interrupted by a team of cross-country runners, and he fled the scene. My sister came home to witness against him, and she had a lot to say once she started talking. Together we and the guys from the cross-country running team convinced the court to lock him up. Not for as long as I would have liked, but still. This happened a couple of days ago. For reference, I'm a 17-year-old female in Australia, and I live a half-hour drive out of town. It was about 10:30 p.m., and I had just finished work. I was on the close shift, and it was a Tuesday night, so naturally it was dead and nobody was around. I was driving home alone, and I was stuck behind this four-wheel drive utility thing. Not good with cars, sorry. And needed to get in the next lane. He was indicating, but wasn't actually going anywhere. So I indicated and overtook him into the next lane over. As I was level with him, he began veering towards me, and all I could think was how much it was going to cost to fix that. So I slammed my hand on the horn and made a "the fuck, bro" gesture as I passed him. In an awkward coincidence, the lights turned red, and we stopped side by side. He motioned for me to wind the window down, and I obliged. I was about to apologize, but I didn't even get a word out before he started screaming at me. He called me a cunt, a fucking bitch, and a stupid fucking pea-plater mongrel, and then threatened to ram into my ass on the motorway. I was tired, it was late, and I couldn't be bothered with him, so I just rolled my eyes at him and wound the window back up while he was talking. That royally pissed him off. He turned bright red, and I saw him reach down, and the ute door opened. I panicked and floored it through the red light onto the motorway. I thought I was all right for a second, but I saw him in my mirrors, speeding up behind me. He was clearly speeding to catch up to me, since I was going like 10 k's over the limit. He had his high beams on and kept flashing them. He was right up behind me, and I could only think about what he'd said about crashing into me. So I tried to go a little faster. I was looking for his number plates in the mirror so I could report him, but either the lights were too bright for me to see, or there was nothing there at all. And there was no way in hell I was going to stop after that performance before. I finally got off the motorway. He was still behind me. And I was a little paranoid that he was following me, even though the motorway only really led to the one area. It could still have been a coincidence. So I pulled into the nearest street, and he was still behind me. So I promptly did a U-turn. And when the guy did it as well, I realized he was absolutely following me. I was about 20 minutes away from home at this point, and I didn't want to lead him anywhere near my house. So I decided on a split-second decision to go to the nearest police station, to hopefully get him off my ass. Unfortunately, the nearest police station closed at 9:30, and I only ended up pulling into a dark, empty car park. I pulled over facing the entrance so I could see if he had followed me. I didn't see him coming in, thankfully, and I figured he chickened out once he saw the police station. I debated calling the cops since I didn't think I was in any danger anymore. That was until I noticed, out of the corner of my eye, a certain white ute slowly creeping up on my left with its lights off. Once again, I panicked and floored it out of the car park and back towards the main road. I had no idea where I was going, no intention to pull over, and no clue who to call. I was going in the complete opposite direction of my house. I eventually spotted a nice, brightly lit petrol station and pulled in there, parking as close to the doors as I possibly could. I jumped out, frantically waved my arms around at the doors. They lock them at night, and have to be manually opened. When I was let in, I started screaming at the poor lady at the register to lock the doors, and that someone was following me. I was absolutely terrified, but thankfully she was quick in the uptake and locked the doors. I realized I'd left my phone in the car, but she offered to call the police. I was keeping an eye on the road outside while the clerk called the cops. I absolutely saw that car drive past, but he didn't come in. The clerk waited with me for the cops to show up, and eventually they did. It was almost 11 by the time they got there. I had literally never been happier to see a cop car in my life. They asked me to describe the guy in the ute, and asked for the registration. I gave them what I could, and one of them drove me home. I haven't heard any follow-ups from anyone, but it was absolutely terrifying. Enough so that I asked to be taken off night shifts for a while. I've only been driving for a little under a year, but honestly, I don't think anything is going to top that experience. Hey everyone, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to episode 54. Thank you so much for all your kind feedback and comments on the previous videos, especially the soldier one. I was a little nervous about how that would be received. I think the author was as well. So thank you very much for that. Alright, what's going on in Hellfreezer Land? Plans and ideas, that's what's happening here. I've been thinking about the possibility of doing a news show. Maybe a once a week type of deal, a few minutes apiece. I'll just pick stories that interest me from the headlines. Some will be horrifying, others will be quite funny. And also an in memoriam section with, featuring celebrities who've passed away, that sort of thing. I'm trying to think of the form I want it to take. I've got to be careful when it comes to being able to use images and news footage. Technically I should be able to, but fair use is an iffy thing here on YouTube. But if all goes well, I'm hoping to have the first one out in the next few weeks. What else? Let me see. Oh yeah, I ordered my new equipment on Monday. Shouldn't take too long. I got off Amazon. They're usually fairly prompt with deliveries. Even though I'm too cheap to actually pay for them, Free delivery, all the way. Okay, so tomorrow's video is going to be 3 killer encounters. Or 3 encounters with killers. I haven't decided on the actual title yet. This one's took me a long time to put together because obviously most of these stories have been done. And I can guarantee at least 2 of them will have been done before. But I came across the 3rd story I needed today, and that was great because I was having trouble thinking what I was doing on Thursday. So that's what we're doing then. Although I'm sure some smarty pants is going to argue that one of the individuals, who is a well-known individual, that this person's family encountered, wasn't actually a killer. And you would be technically correct. But let's not quibble over technicalities. We'll also have paranormal on Friday, and I'm not sure about Saturday yet. Might be a fairy tale. Might be something else. Who knows? Will be something. And the good news is, Sunday is the first day of my holidays, so I'll be a happy Hellfreezer for 2 weeks. I swear to God, these outros are getting longer and longer, aren't they? I should probably start a vlog or something. Just ramble on for a bit. Ah well. Okay, I'm gonna jet now, so until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.